Like and subscribe and click the bell icon to get new video updates.
Vladimir Putin sent his Butcher of Syria to tame Ukraine a month ago. Has it brought Russia any closer to victory? 7 weeks into his disastrous campaign for glory in Ukraine, the Russian President Vladimir Putin knew he was in trouble. He had dreamed of blitzkrieg, of shock and awe, of Russia's flag fluttering over the capital Kyiv by the weekend. Instead, his troops were outsmarted by a small but fierce Ukrainian resistance, and his generals were getting blown up on the battlefield. Russia expected a war that would last no longer than 2 weeks, so fuel and food supplies quickly dwindled. With one invasion, the world's most elusive strongman had pulled back the curtain on his own mystique. He suddenly looked feeble, bumbling and needlessly cruel. But rather than admitting he had gone bust, Mr Putin decided to double down. His war had already killed nearly 2,000 Ukrainians and displaced 4.6 million more. But Mr Putin wanted more brutality and more bloodshed to snatch back the possibility of victory. There was only one man for such a task. And his ruthless tactics on the battlefield had earned him the nickname the Butcher of Syria. Who is the Butcher of Syria brought in to win Putin's war? General Aleksandr Dvornikov is a Korean military officer who has been deployed by the Russian leader in key battlegrounds over the past 2 decades. After graduating from one of Russia's elite Suvorov military schools, Dvornikov worked his way up the ranks to take command of a motor rifle division that stormed the Chechen capital of Grozny in 1999. Grozny was battered by rocket artillery and cluster bombs, while ground forces seized control from rebel fighters in a siege that left thousands of civilians dead, and rendered it the most destroyed city on earth. In the words of their newly installed President Putin, his troops had fulfilled their task to the end. But it was Russia's intervention in the Syrian civil war in 2015 where General Dvornikov gained his reputation as the Butcher. It is no secret that Mr Putin was horrified by the Arab Spring, which saw a wave of revolutions and armed rebellions against long-ruling authoritarian regimes across the Middle East in 2011. Mr Putin was reportedly obsessed with gruesome footage of Libyan dictator Moammar Gaddafi's final moments. The flamboyant and brutal ruler whose grip on power seemed assured was suddenly toppled by a Western-backed uprising and then murdered by his own people. When an uprising sprung up in Syria, Vladimir Putin was determined to protect his ally President Bashar al Assad, and perhaps stop the contagion spreading to his own doorstep. First, he offered only political support at the UN, as well as intelligence and aid. But by 2015, Mr Putin had dispatched General Dvornikov as first commander of the Russian armed forces, to oversee a relentless campaign in support of the Syrian regime. Far from learning from others' mistakes, everyone just keeps repeating them, Mr Putin told the UN 2 days before ordering his military intervention. The export of revolutions, this time of so-called democratic ones, continues. Under General Dvornikov's rule, Russian troops flattened several cities and obliterated civilian targets in the pursuit of military goals. Russian forces were accused of war crimes including the deliberate bombing of civilians and aid workers in attacks on hospitals, schools and homes. The general has been directly accused using tools of terrorism, torture, systematic rape and nerve agents. A retired U.S. Navy admiral even went so far as to describe him in an interview with NBC as the worst of the worst. He was widely criticized for his use of what are known as dumb bombs, or free-fall bombs, unguided, old-fashioned weapons that are far more likely to land on unintended targets. While his tactics in Syria earned him the Butcher moniker, experts say General Dvornikov's brutality was within the bounds of acceptable behavior in Vladimir Putin's army. All the Russians out there, they were extremely brutal and quite unconstrained about using firepower against cities and civilians, said Mark Kanchan, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the U.S. I don't think he was unusual in that regard. I think that is just the way the Russians fight. Still, Mr. Kanchan said, the Butcher captured the attention and admiration of his boss. He was the first one there, and that might have gotten more attention because he set the tone, and it was the first time outsiders have seen the Russians fight a military campaign, he said. Mr Putin bestowed the general with a Gold Star Medal for his services in Syria, naming him a hero of the Russian Federation. After his perceived triumph in Syria, General Dvornikov was put in charge of Russia's southern military district. Within his dominion was the Crimean Peninsula, territory that belonged to Ukraine until Mr Putin annexed it in 2014. And 8 years